Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, and today is a great honour for me as a fellow technologist from Washington, D.C. called Larry Boyer is coming onto the show to talk with me today. And in the last 3 years, we have both supported each other's work and had many debates about technology and how it's shaping our worlds. And although we move in the same circles, like and comment each other's work, and discuss different vantage points on the world of technology, we've never actually spoken and never met. So today is going to be a real treat for me, and I hope for you listening too, of course. Now, as we all know, good news doesn't sell, whereas bad news does, because that's what gets clicks and the engagement that advertisers love. So as a result, we end up with scary tech stories that offer a vision of a dystopian future where the machines rule the earth and automation has removed all jobs. But I think it's time to look at what the future is really going to look like and how we can actually prepare for it. The Robot in the Next Cubicle, What You Need to Know to Adapt and Succeed in the Automation Age, is Larry Boyer's latest book, and I thought it would be a great idea to get him on the podcast today to offer a more balanced discussion of what the future will look like and the role both ourselves and technology is going to play in that. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Washington, D.C. so we can speak with Larry Boyer about his book, The Robot in the Next Cubicle, and what you need to know to adapt and succeed in the automation age. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Larry. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
So I've had a lot of diverse interests throughout my life and career, and I kind of bring them all together today. So I'm part economist, part technician, part statistician, data scientist, as well as career coach and strategist. So I bring a lot of this information together, and I help companies and people improve their lives, improve their business, work more effectively, efficiently, and kind of solve the problems that they have.
Now, as you know, Larry, I'm a big fan of yours and proud to call you my friend, even though we've never actually spoke before, we've never actually met, but we have been supporting each other over the years. And one of the reasons I invited you on the show today was to talk about your incredibly cool book, which is The Robot in the Next Cubicle, What You Need to Know to Adapt and Succeed in the Automation Age. But before we talk about the book, can you just tell me a little bit more about where that inspiration for this book came from and what made you want to sit down and put that idea down on paper?
Sure. I can trace it back to connecting dots between a few things. So the inspiration really came from, I attended at what was called the Novus Summit at the United Nations back in 2016, where they brought together a lot of people to talk about the future and ideas. There were a lot of speakers there, and I actually heard Peter Diamandis talking about exponential change in technologies, and there's a big theme of that, and just all of the disruption that was happening across multiple areas of technology and life. And I started putting a lot of that together with way back when I formed my business, Success Rockets, which was during the financial crisis, when I had a lot of people reaching out to me personally, asking, well, what do I do about my careers? I can't find a job. The entire business, or industry is stressed, and so nobody is hiring. So, and so I started putting a lot of this together and looking at what the future, and particularly with the fourth industrial revolution, was going to be bringing to us. So part of it is robots and artificial intelligence, but there's a lot more to the technological change that's coming that's just going to change how we live and how we work. And a lot of people were talking about at a very high level, whether there's going to be millions of jobs created, millions of jobs destroyed, but nobody was saying, well, what does that mean for you personally? Right? Because it doesn't matter whether, a million new jobs are created if one of those jobs is not for you, whether it's not in your location, you don't have the skills for it or whatever. So people themselves are kind of left out of this macro high-level discussion that you hear happening in industry, in governments, the future of work discussions. It's all very high level, and it's not very personal. So what I wanted to do with the Robot in the Next Cubicle is say, okay, here's what you need to know and look out for, right? So the first thing is like industrial revolutions last a long time. It could be your entire working career. Typically they've lasted 30 or 40 years, right? So if you're just coming into the workforce that's your entire working career that is filled with disruption. And if you're at the end of your career or towards the end of your career, it could end up being the end of your career because you just can't get hired again. So it's important for people to understand what the natures of the disruptions are so that they can then start to make the adjustments that they need to either stay employed, learn the right technologies, learn some other skill so that they can move forward in their life and have some sort of financial security.
One of the big frustrations that I often talk about on this show is around every tech article featuring a header from fictional movies such as The Terminator with a header image of a killer robot with those red eyes. And I've been crying out for articles and books to actually educate people that we shouldn't actually fear technology, And as we enter that fourth industrial revolution, can you tell the listeners a little more about what this actually means and the lessons we can learn from our past? And, of course, those textile workers a few hundred years ago that were smashing up machines.
Sure. I think there's a couple things. So first is to understand what makes an industrial revolution as opposed to just a regular technological evolution, right? Because we've lived through a lot of technological evolutions. I think our phones are a good example, right? Where we've gone from landlines to flip phones and cell phones, and now we've got smartphones, right? And that's just a natural progression of the technology, and it happens over a course of time, and we can adjust to that. Industrial revolutions are a lot bigger than that, right? So there's many technologies across many industries that are changing, as well as things like new forms of energy being used to power those technologies, and then they start to converge, and then new tools are built on top of them. So you can think about going back to the maybe second industrial revolution, where we had electrification, right? And so first, came electricity, and then the ability to distribute electricity, and then came on a whole host of new products from that we all enjoy today. Everything from refrigerators and washing machines and microwaves, to then the seeds of the third industrial revolution, which is computers, right? So it's a lot of new technologies all coming back together to again, change how work is done, change how it is that we live. And you can't even imagine what that is at the onset of it. And so it's really revolutionary in that sense. And when you look back at the Luddites, I think there's some important lessons there. One is they were right to be concerned about their jobs, right? Because all of them were ultimately put out of work. Right. The mistake that they have, and the mistake that hopefully people aren't going to make today, is to adapt to the technologies and learn something new. Right. They wanted to fight something that you just can't fight. I mean, you might as well try to fight, having the sun come up in the morning. Right. Technology is going to evolve, and we're all going to be using it, and it's very difficult to just stay behind and then you'll be able to make a living and have some sort of financial security. So you've got to move along with it. You've got to learn. You've got to learn what to drop and which direction to move. I like to liken it a little bit to like whitewater rafting, right? So you can't necessarily know or plan every aspect of your whitewater rafting trip, but what you can do is train and develop the skills so that you can adapt to whatever unknown situations come before you. And so I think that's an important point that people need to just keep in mind.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you on that point, because it does seem that in the past we failed to educate people and bring everyone along for the ride, so to speak. So as a result, people were afraid of technological change. It's the natural reaction. So how can we avoid making these same mistakes, and what challenges do we need to consider, do you think?
Sure. So I think there's several aspects to this. One, I would like to challenge any leaders and CEOs of any companies to be more transparent with their employees about where the company is going. We see a few examples of these. I think AT&T was one good example where the CEO just came out and said, this is the direction of the company. We are going to be adopting these technologies. We're giving you some time to learn some of these new technologies, and you can either choose to come along with us or not. But at least they were transparent about what the direction they were going. However, I think a lot of companies aren't that transparent, and so people end up being shocked when they discover that their company has bought another company that's basically going to displace the work that they're doing, or they're working on technologies, and then suddenly, again, their job is no longer needed. And then that just leaves them hanging, right? So we see, then people, hundreds or thousands of people losing their jobs as a result of that, with little or no preparation and no opportunity to adapt to that. And I think so that, I think there's a lack of fairness to that, but also it causes an employment problem because employers are also having very difficult times finding trained and qualified employees. So it'll become increasingly difficult in the future. So you want to bring your employees along. So for the flip side of that is the employee's responsibility, right? And they have to, one, be on the lookout for this and not necessarily count on their executives or managers sharing information or even being aware of the changes that are coming to them, and to look out for the signs that maybe their job or their company itself might be in trouble in the future, and start taking the steps that they need to change, and including changing jobs and companies if necessary. Because ultimately, you're responsible for yourself, and nobody's really going to be looking out for you all that much. So take care of yourself and look for these changes.
So when it comes to artificial intelligence, machine learning and robotics and all these big trends that we're seeing at the moment around technology, are you noticing any particular companies that are standing out and paving the way?
There's a lot of them. And so one of the things I would like to say, just in case I leave somebody out, if somebody knows of some or wants to share the companies that they're familiar with, to please do so, maybe in the comments here. So that there's some that, I think get a lot of attention, because they're a little bit more personal, and we see them on the news, like the Pepper the robot, or Teamy, which is like a little personal assistant, like a maid or bartender for itself, at home. So there's the robots like that, anything from automated vehicles like we see with Tesla and some of the others. But there are a lot of companies that are probably less of household names that are building robots. I think Great Orange is one that's working in robotics for logistics and supply chain. We see Google or Alphabet itself is a big developer of robots. So there are a lot of companies that are involved in robots. Boston Robotics is one that we see a lot on social media, because they've got their dog robot that moves around. In fact, Sony was just marketing in the US, I think starting today, their pet dog robot. Boston Robotics has a lot of robots, that have, I think, military uses. So there's lots of companies out there experimenting and doing different things with robotics. And I think it's important to remember that we're just in the earliest stages of seeing any of these robots come out, and which companies will be successful in the long run is probably anybody's guess.
Another question I feel like I've got to ask is, especially around the fear that surrounds technology, is do you think that by passing on those repetitive and mundane tasks to machines, it actually represents an opportunity for humans to move away from robotic tasks and essentially get back to being human?
Absolutely. And I think that's the most important thing that we all need to remember, right? As robots take on more and more tasks, we have to remember those robots are also becoming more and more human-like. And so we don't want to compete with robots becoming more and more machine-like. We want to compete with robots becoming more and more human. So we need to really understand ourselves a whole lot better. We need to understand, what does it mean to be human? What are the advantages of being human? And to capitalize on those. And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about what that means, to us ourselves personally. It's certainly not discussed in education. The system's just not set up for that. So, I would encourage everybody to take some time to think about, what makes you special, what makes you unique, just as a human being and as the particular human being that you are, because we're all different.
Absolutely. And in your book, you also talk about entering the new age of the preneur. And I'm a bit of a one-man band over here, so I'm often referred to as a solopreneur. But I mean, can you expand on that point and what you talk about in the book?
Sure. I dedicate an entire chapter to this, and it's one of the ones that I see a lot of discussion about, and it's a bigger topic, I think, than you can really talk about in the book. And so there's multiple dimensions to it. Right. So there's the entrepreneur starting their own business. There's intrapreneurs working within a company, and I think the first thing one needs to understand is just the mindset of the entrepreneur, intrapreneur, because these are skills that are important to develop increasingly, during this time of disruption, right? So it's the ability to recognize opportunities. It's the ability to think creatively or differently, to bring together different ideas or different technologies and do something with them, right? So there's a mindset that goes along with being an entrepreneur that's important. There's also a skill set, if you're looking to build a business, right? And the skill sets can easily be learned, right? You just have to learn, well, how do I set up a company? How do I do marketing? How do I, go through all of the steps that you need to set up and run a business and what that means, right? And there's lots of books out there about that. So you really need to start learning some of that. And part of the reasons, there's a couple of reasons for it, really. One is what do you do if you lose your job? And can you go back into the workforce and find another more traditional type of job or not? And that might, again, depend on where you are in your career, where you're located. Right, if you're living in a rural area and you lose your job, there's a lot fewer opportunities than if you're in an urban area. Also, if you're later in your career, it's much more difficult to get another job, especially at the same pay. So entrepreneurship might be, and starting a business might be the path forward for you. As well as, we're all living longer. And so what is it that you do to keep yourself busy and engaged? One of the things I was at a conference recently, I was a little surprised to learn this. The average 10-year-old today in Western countries can expect to live to be 110 years old. Wow. Now, when I was at this conference, they asked people to map out their life. And they said, okay, well, here, go from birth to today and just list down the major landmarks in your life. Now do the same thing from where you are today to age 110. And you know what? Nobody in the entire conference really had anything past age 80. And most of what people had there was, grandchildren. So we don't really know what it is that we want to do with our lives.
Really don't. A lot of people never find out the answer to that question either. So for everyone listening, of course, the $1 million question has to be, what do they need to know to adapt and succeed in the automation age?
So, you need to really be aware of what's happening in your industry. So I would first encourage everyone to look and research what is it that's happening in your industry with new technologies, and that could be anything from new materials and material science. It could be genetics and medical research. It could be artificial intelligence. It could be data science or machine learning. Learn how these things impact your job, or could. Also, like virtual reality is another one. How are they going to impact your job, both today and in the near-term future and in the long term, and start learning them. Start playing around with them. A lot of times they come into our lives actually through games and fun. So, one easy thing that you can do, even to start learning a little bit about virtual reality or augmented reality is like the game Pokemon Go, right? You can just download it onto your smartphone and play around with it. A lot of people dismiss it as being something silly, but this is your avenue to start to explore a new technology that you might very well find that you're using on the job next year in a much more serious way. And a lot of companies are starting to use them, whether it's to like inspect equipment or something else. So look at where technology is going. Look at entertainment and games, and just play around with it a little. You don't have to be an expert, but at least be aware of what's happening. So experiment. That's all part of, again, that entrepreneurial mindset. You don't have to be an expert. Just play around with it, learn enough about it that you need to know, and move on.
So for anyone listening to us talk here that's been inspired by your journey, they know about you writing in Forbes and you've published your own book here. But is there any advice that you would like to pass down to anyone listening that wants to follow in your footsteps?
At the core, it's understanding what it is that drives you. What are you interested in? So on what it is that I'd like to do, which is really impact people's lives by connecting the dots of the bigger picture and then bringing it down on a personal level. And this is an example of it with the robot in the next cubicles, is saying, okay, how is it that I can look at macro trends and make it much more personal to people? And that's what people need to do, is understand what is it that drives you, and then figure out, well, how can I make a career out of it? How can I monetize it? Because that's where your success points are going to be in the future.
So what's next for you, Larry? I mean, is there any other burning ambitions that you can share with us today?
Well, the next thing I'm looking to do is, later in September, launch a course and hopefully online community called the Future Proofing Academy, where we can discuss all of these issues. And so I'll bring a lot of the information that we have in the robot in the next cubicle, go into it in more depth, have information on worksheets and stuff so that people can actually go in and work through some of this themselves, as well as engage in discussions about what to do about it. So I think no single person has all of the information that they need available. So the more people that we bring together, we can share information and insights about what we see happening in different industries. We can share different insights about what it takes to move forward, form business relationships, and whether that's helping each other get jobs or helping each other develop new business, any of that. And so what I'd like to see is people just coming together, helping each other out, and moving through the fourth industrial revolution together. And because we're all in this together.
Absolutely. I think that's a perfect note to end on there. We're all in this together. But before I do let you go, can I just ask that you remind the listeners of where they can find you online, follow you on Twitter, check out your website, and of course, most importantly, where they can find your book?
Sure. Well, you can find the book anywhere that you can buy books. If they don't have it in your actual bookstore, you can order it through them or any online stores as well. You can find me on my website at successrockets.com, and I'm on any social media, fairly easy to find. On LinkedIn, just Larry Boyer. Twitter at Larry Boyer. I should be fairly easy to find anywhere online.
Well, before I let you go, I also need to thank you, Larry, because although I've not written my own book, it is a burning ambition of mine. I do appear in a book. I believe you thanked me in your book too.
Yes.
So I salute
right
you for
front.
that, my friend.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate your thoughts and comments on it while I developed it. That was all most appreciated. There's a lot here to go through and understand and make sure it's right.
Yeah, well, I think the problem is, especially the tech media, good news doesn't sell, whereas bad news does sell. So as a result, most of the articles we read are sensationalised and seem to just stoke up a bit of fear and our technology is a bad thing. But what I love about your book here is if you actually spend a few moments if anyone listening spends a few moments to buy it and read it, is it actually educates people that technology is nothing to be feared, and actually it's going to help us, and it's going to help set us free from boring, mundane, robotic tasks and helps us be more human.
Right.
And that's got to be a great thing. So a big thank you for helping deliver that message. Thanks, Larry.
Oh, great. Well, thank you very much.
The Robot in the Next Cubicle is more than a book. It's Larry Boyer's insights on how to help survive in the fourth industrial revolution. And confession time, it's a book that I'm currently reading in sunny Mexico as you listen to this podcast. And there is another example of how technology can be put to great use. I'm on holiday in Mexico reading Larry's book while you listen in 165 countries to our conversation that we had last week. That blows my mind. But although Larry is a technologist, his recommendations are simply that you pinpoint your values, your purpose, your vision and your mission and position yourself to swim with the tide rather than against it. But enough for me. I mean, this is a topic that's going to affect each and every one of us. And I want to know what you think of the book, the concept, the technology, and our future. And I know you have an opinion, because if you didn't, you wouldn't be listening to this show right now. And as a result, I try to be the most approachable podcast host that I can be. So my door is always open. And you can share your opinions, your insights, your expertise by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, or tweeting me at Neil C. Hughes. So that's it from me. Time for me to dive back into Larry's book. So I'll see you again tomorrow. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.